Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 47 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. And what a week it's been. So, in the mainstream media, we've had the sacrifice of Ed Heath. Oh, he's already dead. So, Ted Heath, the former Prime Minister, is outed as a paedophile. No real surprises, of course, but it's another dead politician. And it seems that the establishment are only able to invoke those who have passed on into the next world, trying to deny the fact that this is still rampant. One aspect of this is that there are an increasing number of serving police officers who are becoming increasingly dismayed at the magnitude of the suppression being enforced by their senior officers. A number of these officers have actually been placed on sick leave to try to get them out of the way. And of course, they're being threatened with the removal or loss of their pension. So anyone who still thinks that the establishment are determined to get to the bottom, no pun intended, of this abomination, then unfortunately you're very much mistaken, because actually the establishment is doing everything it can, of course, to cover up and literally throw a few dead politicians into the sacrifice. So I'd encourage you to watch the edition of UK Column News that will follow this programme on UK Column Live. If you're watching the show on YouTube, then go check out the UK Column News episode from August 4th. It's a very enlightening programme. Well, elsewhere, of course, the establishment is not averse to letting those who cross swords with it that it's on the case. And last week, whilst I was travelling up to North Yorkshire, I was tailgated by a BMW who came up on me at a somewhat alarming rate of knots and then tailgated me for a few miles. The driver gesticulating that he wanted me out of the way, but seeing there was a lot of traffic, there was nowhere I could go. Well, when eventually I did pull over, I was rather taken aback by the number plate. So as the car passed me, I went in pursuit. I didn't exceed the speed limit, of course, but eventually the vehicle was held up in the traffic and my dash cam recorded the number plate. And the number plate is here for all to see. Oil, O-I-L, 6366. Now, I'm going to suggest that there was nothing untoward here and that the driver of that vehicle was no more than a boy racer who was probably just trying to get home from school a little early. But nonetheless, the industry, I'm sure, has had the thought cross their minds. And we all know what they are capable of. But in this case, the universe works in some very interesting ways sometimes. So perhaps this was just a heads up. But the timing is really quite synchronistic, because we are literally in the, literally to the week. This is the 5th anniversary of the death of Matthew Simmons. Now, Matthew Simmons and I were on the same cause 5 years ago, where he, over on the other side of the Atlantic, and me from this side of the Atlantic, were trying to expose the magnitude of the disaster and the root causes of the disaster that occurred in the Gulf of Mexico in April 2010. And of course, I refer to the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. Matthew Simmons actually came to the same conclusion that I did, that the two company men, Bob Kaluza and Donald Vadrine, were culpable and should have been held to account. But he went one stage further when he actually identified the fact that BP were lying about having capped the well, and he was able to prove that the subsea cameras were actually being focused on another well, a well that had already been capped, and therefore claimed and in my opinion, correctly, that even in late July, that the BP Deepwater Horizon well, the Macondo well, had not been capped. Well, on August the 8th of 2010, Matthew, and here's the report from Forbes magazine, Matthew was found dead in his hot tub at his home in Maine. Now, Matthew had been a big part of the oil industry up until 2008. He had actually been one of the advocates of the peak oil hypothesis. But then I think around 2007, 2008, he realized that peak oil was an industry con. It was a con that had been created to create the perception of scarcity on the basis that we are normally prepared to pay a premium for something that we actually believe to be scarce. I think Matthew realized that that was a con. In 2008, he announced that he was moving away from any investments associated with hydrocarbons, and he stated that his ambition was to establish offshore wind farms off of his home state, which was Maine, up in the northeast of the US. And no pun, but he said that by 2020, his vision was that all of Maine's electricity, that's the state of Maine, would come from renewables. Well, sadly, Matthew was never going to be able to fulfill that on the basis that he had a tragic heart attack in his hot tub just a week after outing BP for their deception in the Gulf of Mexico. So, people have asked me, because I posted the webcam up on Facebook, and people have asked me if I've reported the driver to the police. Well, on the basis that the police no longer have the resources to attend burglaries, I doubt very much they have the resources to go knock on the door of a young boy racer. So if you are the driver, or you know the driver of OIL 6366, you might want to tell him that his picture is now part of Humanity vs. Insanity, episode number 47. And he might be advisable to slow down a little bit and leave a little bit more space between the vehicles that he encounters on the A1M on his way home from school, college, or work, whichever it may be. So there you have it. I will leave it at that. But join me later on this evening for Fracking Nightmare, where we'll be looking at the latest developments as the British government seeks to introduce this insidious industry onto this densely populated island of ours. But we're going to change tack on Humanity vs. Insanity, and we're going to continue along the same vein as we were discussing last week with the remarkable number of alternative health practitioners who had sadly had an early demise, particularly in the last 7 weeks. In fact, since June the 19th. In fact, it is now 9 alternative health practitioners that have died, and 5 are missing. So last week we spoke with Dr. Graham Downing, and he's back with us again this week. So Graham, are you there with me?
Hi Ian, I'm here.
Well, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Are you sitting in the bathroom there?
No, I'm actually in a kind of porch. I'm in Bournemouth at the moment, so I'm everywhere every time you interview me. I'm never at home, so.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting backdrop that you have there.
It is what we've got.
Maybe it's the only quiet place you could find.
Yeah, that's it. You've got it. We've got to go with it.
All right, well, thanks for joining us. Now, Graham, I mean, what sort of reaction have you had since our discussion last week to our observation and comments about the demise of the alternative health practitioners?
I think it's an interesting one. Some people are very scared. Patients are. They say, well, why are you speaking out? And you know, they're obviously worried. And I said, well, don't worry. There's nothing to do with me. I'm not in Florida, and I don't use this stuff anyway. And others are well, you know, that's obvious, isn't it? You know, it's amazing how many members of the public just seem to think, well, that's what would go on now. I mean, many years ago, you'd never dream of thinking about these things in those terms, that there might be people actually deliberately killing people. Look, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball. I couldn't tell you that these people have been killed or not. It looks incredibly coincidental that so many people in such a, as I said before, in such a small, flora is not a small space, but at least in one state or linked to that state, have all been removed from this planet one way or another. I think as it pans out, I think I think at least one or two of them may just be the fact that it's happened naturally. I've got a sneaking suspicion that that's going to.
Well, one or two out of 9.
Yeah, I've got a sneaking suspicion that that's going to be the case. Because it still doesn't pan out to me. And I was chatting to you earlier about this here. It just still doesn't sit with me about GC-MAF because, listen, I hope it is the panacea for all ills and it's great and it eventually comes out that that's the case. But I've been watching this over many years and I'm not fully convinced of that yet. And not to put a down on anyone who wants to believe in it. Listen, if it works and you've used it, then great. And then, let's hear those success stories. But I'm still, this doesn't sit true to me that all these people have suddenly been taken out to do a GC-MAF. This stuff's been around a long, 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 long time. And there's lots of other stuff out there that's being used that's successful as well. And what people don't realise is that GC-MAF isn't just in the hands of alternative doctors. It's used in research in some of the finest institutes. People are writing right from Harvard and all sorts of facilities, medical facilities and research facilities in America and around the world. So it's not such a big secret. And like I said, it may well be a simple case that these poor chaps have been murdered and that's just the way it is. I don't know. It just still doesn't sit right with me. I still think that there's something else going on here.
Well, let's come back to that in a second.
Yeah.
But let's just stay with the GC-MAF element for a moment. Because, I agree with you. There's no doubt that it has been around for a while and there are a number of institutes around the world that are using it. But it does seem to be that it is literally in the past 2 to 3 years or so that it has found a way into the wider consciousness. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone's heard of it because clearly they haven't. But particularly those who have, unfortunately, developed a cancer. And more people, of course, when they do or their relatives do, they're hitting the internet to look for alternatives. And of course, the two that come up most often, not necessarily in isolation, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that these are two aspects that are working entirely in isolation. There's other elements as well, but are cannabis oil and GC-MAF.
Yeah, there's strict laws on what you can say about cancers and cures, where you can't say you cure a cancer. So I always put it in inverted commas. I think...
well, that's the Cancer Act of 1937, isn't it, I believe?
I think it's 39.
39, yeah, thereabouts. So certainly late 30s anyway. The Cancer Act that prohibits medical practitioners from discussing any alternative to the orthodoxy.
Which is crazy, really, because you're supposed to have informed consent. And informed consent, by definition, is you need to discuss other things and also all the safety issues and be honest about it. And if you look at stats of cancer, how it's changed over the years, I don't think there's a lot of honesty going on there. But that's a whole other subject about how the stats are changed and sort of gerrymandered. But leaving that aside, what was really interesting, when I gave a talk on DNA, and we talked about GMO and vaccines and some of the things that happens to DNA, possibly as a result of using those things. As I gave a workshop afterwards, and the next day, and someone came up to me afterwards. It was a district nurse. I don't know if I told you this, and I may have mentioned one to you privately, or maybe on one of the shows. Can't remember. And she said to me that she reversed an end-stage cancer in one of her friends using cannabis oil. Stage 4 cancer, usually the ones that unfortunately are going to progress quite. You're not really going to survive it, unfortunately. And she didn't want to tell anyone. And the classic thing is, when they go back to the oncologist, they don't tell him. He just sits there dumbfounded, thinking, "Wow, this is obviously as a result of their treatment or some miracle." But really, the intervention they used was cannabis oil. So, and that was a district nurse. That wasn't just a member of the public. That was a health professional. So I think cannabis oil. I think what the sad thing is this: if you took the reins off and you actually allowed a proper freedom of information and you bearing in mind that there's no money put into this stuff, none, zero. No one's really funding this or funding the research. If you was actually to put £1 million, just £1 million compared to what is put into normal medical research, that's really small change. You could see an incredible difference in outcomes of cancer. The so-called alternative medical fields have had solutions, I'm going to put that in inverted commas, for many, 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 many years. And to give you one interesting kind of nugget, there's a mineral called selenium, And some very well-respected colleagues of mine as a pathologist, is a very, very clever doc, and he's gone up against the FDA, I think, 8 times successfully and beat them in court. He's a very clever guy, and he doesn't speak off the cuff. He speaks from a good knowledge base. And his famous quote is, if you was to give every young woman 200 micrograms of selenium a day, then you'd pretty much eradicate breast cancer in 1 generation. And that's just one mineral.
But also shut down a massive part of the radiation industry.
I mean, when you look at some of the pioneers of chemotherapy, like Hans Napier and people like that, brilliant doc, very interesting story of him. He was of Jewish parents in Germany during the war, and managed to evade the death camps and all the rest of it. Very interesting story. Very bright guy. He ended up going to his parents helped many prominent Jews escape, who went on to become leading physicians in America. And eventually they used that influence to get him into America, to become a physician. He also was a brilliant physicist. And you find this, people who come from a different tack don't just come the normal sort of way where they're conditioned. And he was already a published physicist before he became an MD. And he pretty much developed the chemotherapeutic industry, as it were, in the States, at Sloan Kettering with another 2 docs. And eventually they turned around in the 60s and said, this stuff is rubbish. You know, we're killing people off faster than we're saving them. And he was working on a kind of blend of natural cures. Things like, people have heard of B17, Latril and stuff like that. He was one of the original guys that did that. And when he presented his results to the hierarchy and said, look, we're getting incredible results with this, they literally turned around and said, you've got to bury it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but he made the right statement, obviously, that they wanted to hear when he said that we're killing more people than we're curing.
Well,
and they basically went, yes, that's exactly, of course, what they set out to do. And
five, yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, hey, listen, I just want you to, well, not you, because I know you know, but for our viewers, I mean, this is the guy that I have labelled as the UK state executioner. And this is his resume. This is the guy who heads up the MHRA, which is the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority. He's been in the director role of Inspection, Enforcement and Standards for the MHRA since 2005. So he's been there a decade. But look at his career. Prior to that, he has a BSc in Applied Microbiology from the University of Strathclyde. He graduated in 72. From 72 to 78, he was a microbiologist with the NHS. Then he went into the pharmaceutical industry, basically. And so from 78 to 95, he worked with the Wellcome Foundation, then with Glaxo Wellcome, and then between 2000 and 2004, GlaxoSmithKline, so as quality compliance. So, you know, obviously he was perfectly qualified to take on the role of Director of Inspection, Enforcement and Standards at the MHRA, basically to ensure that the pharmaceutical industry revenue streams are protected and that anybody who had anything that might counter or impact upon the revenue streams of Big Pharma was effectively shut down.
I think that what always astonishes me is how everything is in plain sight, and without even, you know me, I kind of walk the middle path on this. I'm certainly, I'm not an expert in conspiracy theory and all the rest of it. And the more I go along with this, it becomes less conspiracy and more truth. I mean, you know my history with this from meeting you many years ago. But and I was interested in when you give a talk, you always get certain questions, and I put a slide up at the beginning of my talk, and you know, questions like, well, why doesn't my doctor know about this? If you're telling new information, why isn't it on the news? And aren't medical physicians all science based? And isn't pharmaceutical stuff all the top science? And what I did was address some of those questions before I spoke, because what you don't want to do is halfway through you have to try and explain everything to people. I mean, it doesn't usually go that way at Alternative View, because most people are very well schooled in what goes on. But one of the slides I put up, and bearing in mind this is just science, I'm not making this stuff up, is it was a study about statins, and it effectively showed that over 65, those people that have the highest level of cholesterol compared to the lowest level, the ones with the highest level would live longer, and the lowest level were dying at twice the rate compared to the higher level. and which is it's complete opposite of what you're going to get told from your GP. But that's based on science. That's not based on pharmaceutical science. And some other facts that I gave, which I think astounded me when I found these out, is that medicine as it stands, what we call allopathic medicine, because I'm not an allopathic doctor, I'm a functional medicine doctor, completely different ballgame. Allopathic medicine, when you look at it, the Institutes of Medicine in the States said that only 4% of it has got any real solid science behind it. 4.
Well, but the standard industry rate for getting a medicine approved is to demonstrate an efficacy of only 5%. so basically, and that's against the placebo, of course. So only 1 in 20 of the guinea pigs who is taking the medicine that's under trial, if only 1 in 20 shows the desired result, then effectively the medicine is given approval. I mean, this is outrageous.
Well, the thing is that, and I know oddly enough, my circle of friends are all the heads of cancer research, top statisticians at drug. I mean, some real. When I get into a party,
after they've seen this program, you might not get invited to their dinner parties anymore.
I had a toe-to-toe with one of them, and she was the head statistician. Say that when you've had a few drinks. I don't drink, so I can say it. She was a head statistician, and she was, oh my right, it was like dealing with an alpha male. I mean, it was unreal. But see, they firmly believe that what they're doing is correct and right, and there's no jiggery-pokery. But the science, Dr. Ioannidis, or Ioannidis, can never pronounce his name correctly, he's like the leading guy in research, and he clearly states, I mean, this guy's he has like 1,000 invites a year to speak at Harvard and Oxford, and he clearly states, the evidence shows that he says conservatively, 90% of the stuff that's published, the medical science that's published, is pretty much worthless. It's biased, it's garbage. In what they did before, they just used to write the abstracts. They used to ghost write the abstracts, how they wanted it to be, like their little advert for their paper.
Well, it's basically down to who's funding it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I mean, this is the problem. I mean, it's like Gerald Heddle here. I'm sure that when he was a microbiologist working with the National Health Service, if the records still existed from way back then, I mean, I'm sure he did quite nicely out of some funding from the pharmaceutical industry, as they were sort of pushing their products into the NHS.
Well, I talked with different docs and all the rest of it, and what they went on from ghostwriting these abstracts, most scientists just read the abstract. They haven't got time to read the paper. There's so many things. There's like 13,000 plus published every week. They went on from doing that to getting ghostwriters to write the whole article. And then what they do is they ring the researcher up and say, look, we're interested in your work. How about we give you loads of money? He says, yeah, great. You're talking several, tens of thousands of dollars in the States. And then he'll say, great. And the next day, the article arrives on their desk. And they say, well, what's this? Say, look, it's kind of what, it's roughly, we had it done. We just thought we'd, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, these guys take the money and that's it. Then they've got them. Then they can't come out and say, well, actually, because that's their career over. And then you see these guys have got hundreds of papers coming out every year. They could be doing all this research. And then they went one step further. We thought that was it. And then they went one step further. They're now publishing complete and utter bogus journals. A complete journal. Their own journal, published on the web. And this all feeds into this disinformation about science. And what people have got to understand is medical physicians are not basing what they do on science. They're basing it on pharmaceutical science. And the pharmaceutical industry ring fences the doctors and doesn't let anybody near them. And there's very, very strategies. And it ends up with nonsense like I was telling you about the statins. And now that colleague I was telling you before, the pathologist, he estimates that, and this is his figure, and he's a very bright chap, he estimates that the whole cholesterol thing, the whole lowering your cholesterol and the statins, he states that from its inception to now, he reckons that 1 billion people have been prematurely removed from this planet because of that philosophy of lowering cholesterol and using statins as well, statin drugs. 1 billion. I mean, that is, and this guy's a very bright chap. He never usually speaks off the cuff. He knows his stuff, and I trust what he says. I mean, I've never dreamed in a million years it was that many people. But he that according to him, that's what he estimates. 1 billion people. It's frightening.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to sort of, cast my own experience. Fortunately, I haven't needed to engage the services of the allopathic health service very often. But the last time was a few years ago now, and I went to the doctor, and as I was explaining the symptoms, he was just basically typing them in. And I thought, well, okay, that's good. He's making a real-time report. But no, he was basically putting it into the database, into the search engine. And then the search engine, which was obviously a uniquely medicines search engine, was effectively providing all these recommendations of all the prescriptions that he could give me. And so, then he's basically giving me a diagnosis, but I know he's reading it. He's basically reading it off the screen of the database that he's been searching. So I let him sort of go through everything. And then I said to him, okay, I said, what would be the alternative to that? If I said that I didn't want to take those medicines, what would be the alternative? What would your recommendation be? And you know what? He was actually taken aback, because clearly the vast majority of people, or probably everybody else, I'm sure there's some exceptions, literally take what these guys say at face value. And of course they end up sort of basically rattling as they walk, because these docs are prescribing just about as many pharmaceuticals as they possibly can, because of all the nice advantages they get from pushing these particular products. But eventually I'd really pushed this doctor, and you know what he said to me? He said, well, I guess you better take a look on the internet.
Oh my word. At least he was honest.
Well,
at least he was honest. I mean, you see this. It's law, as far as I understand. It's law. I mean, I'm a medical expert witness, so as far as I understand, on the balance of probabilities, what we say, you need to give informed consent. Now, informed consent is you're supposed to tell the patient the risks, and you're supposed to lay out any alternative. Now, I'll give you a clear example of that, which is the flu vaccine. They recently had a push to vaccinate over 750,000 children for flu, which is the most ridiculous thing that anyone's ever heard of, in your life. I mean, you really look at, I'm not going to get into the whole detail about the gerrymandering that goes on with the science with that, but I'll just give you a simple example of this kind of nonsense. The flu vaccine itself, if you ever go onto the VARS site, which is what you look at the adverse events from these things, it's horrendous. And also adverse events are underreported anywhere from 10 to 100 times. So you have to take any statistic you get and multiply it by 10 to 100, and you're probably going to get the truth of what damage these things can do. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to take a vaccine, go do it. I'm not going to say don't do it. It's not my business. But they did a study, and they just used a very small amount of vitamin D3, 1,200 IU, international units, and they gave it to kids. And they did a study on, did it in a very prestigious hospital. They did proper research on it, and they found, and the actual professor that did the research said, well, my understanding from looking at these results is not only is this better than the vaccine, it's better than the antiviral drugs, and they're way stronger. And 1,200 IUs of vitamin D3, trust me, is going to do absolutely nothing to you in terms of any adverse events, apart from the fact you're going to feel really healthy, and you're going to feel pretty well. And so based on that, when you went to see your GP and he offered you the vaccine, he needed to tell you that the deaths, the respiratory problems, and all the other illnesses and morbidities and fatalities from taking the flu vaccine. He should have told you that. And then he should have told you of the alternative, which you were trying to press before, in your case, that there is vitamin D3, which is published. It's in the literature, and they didn't do it. And then when you go onto the sites and onto the NHS site, there's nothing there of it. So in my understanding, they're breaking the law.
Well, Graham, it's interesting you should mention the flu vaccine, because of course there are many now acknowledged effects. I won't even say side effects; it's effects. I mean, we know of the phenomenal number of cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome, of narcolepsy, and now when as it so happens, I anticipated that we were going to see another fake epidemic back in 2008, 2009. And in 2009, in April 2009, I gave a presentation to the Shoreditch Sisters Women's Institute in East London. And the title of that presentation was called The Truth Injection. And basically what I was doing was explaining to them, I was taking them through the history and the players behind the flu vaccine, and also the development of Tamiflu, And I was talking about all these symptoms, and I mean, obviously, I claim absolutely no medical knowledge whatsoever. I was simply pulling together the research that was readily available. All I had to do was spend a few days just pulling it all together. Now, I presented that as a DVD in, I think it was June or July of 2009. It's still available. It's called The Truth Injection. And everything that I presented in that talk has subsequently been supported by articles in the mainstream media. And like I said, I claim no special insight. I simply did the research.
Well, this is the thing, and to just take you back, well, just stay on the topic of this, because it's something that most people know about. I know that before all the research came out in all these wonderful health, I can't remember the name of the sites. There's stacks of them now. Natural Health News, all these kind of whatever they are sites. They were of late now. A load of information has come out. And when I was dealing with this, it wasn't available. You had to go and dig into the research and do it for yourself. Same as you. And I went down to the school, and I knew from animal studies that if you give someone a vaccine, there's a significant chance they may spread it to someone. They may spread the illness, if you like, to the next person. And with the flu vaccine, there's up to a 40% or maybe more transmission rate. They shed the virus. So I looked at that. I looked at other studies, and I went down to the school and I said, look, I'm not here to tell everyone what to do. I've got a meeting with the head teacher, and I said, I just want to ensure that my kids are not in the school for at least 2 weeks after you give this. And I said, and I'll show you why. And I gave her just a little presentation on a PowerPoint. It was set so that a layperson could understand it. Now, at the beginning of that presentation, you could see her face, and her face was adamant. There's no way on earth that she was going to let my kids out of that school, or they were going to do that. And by the end of it, her pen went down, and she said to me, "Can I show this to the Board of Governors?" And I said, "Yes," and she did. And then we got a letter 2 days later, and do you know what that letter said?
Go on.
They cancelled the whole vaccination program at that school.
Fantastic.
They shut it down. And what I find is, I've yet to find anyone, if you sit with them and just give them the facts, that they won't change their opinion on this. Now, to say to this, I did not go in saying I wanted the whole thing shut down. That wasn't my intention. My intention was to protect my children against something which is unnecessary and very dangerous. And oddly enough, at that time, just as we heard they were going to bring this in, I was walking into the clinic, and there's like a coffee area just near it. And near this coffee area, there's a girl that worked there, and she's a physio. She's just finishing her training, so she's working part-time, making coffees and stuff. And she said, "Oh, there's a boy came in today, and he was paralysed, and his mum swore blind it was the flu vaccine." And she said it as if there's no way it could be that. So I stopped, opened up my bag, and I pulled out the jerk. I always got references with me. I said, "Look at that." And it's known, it's in the literature, that an effect of that, it can cause a problem in the spinal cord, and you can be paralysed.
And this is the Guillain-Barré, isn't it?
There's that, and there's another one I'm talking about as well, avoiding too much technology, because I'll probably forget myself. No, but there's an inflammation that can happen across the spine, and it can cause problems. Now, some people recover completely, others partly recovers, and others don't recover. In the case with this kid, he didn't recover, and he lost control of his bowel and bladder as well. Now, it's a perfectly healthy kid who did not need that vaccine. There was a safer alternative, and that's him stuffed. And it's just ridiculous that these physicians and these nurses and these people don't understand and read the literature and apply it, and still are absolutely blinded, like horses with those bloody things around their eyes, just looking one way down the track. And his mum, like I said, she was saying, no, he was fine before the vaccine. And obviously no one was telling her. Everyone was just, sort of whistling and acting like she probably wasn't speaking very loud.
Yeah.
And that kind of shored me up. There's no way I was going to let that happen to my kids. So, and you have to be confident, because the science is there to support you. And I've had arguments with so many doctors over this, and literally they don't last 5 minutes once you give them the facts. Yeah.
I can remember actually when the MMR vaccine was being debated in Parliament, and of course the establishment was doing everything to defend the vaccine. And I remember Quintin Letts, who's the parliamentary sketch writer for the Daily Mail, and he was writing up as a sketch writer the discussion in Parliament, and he basically wrote, and I mean this was the first time I realised that he'd got an autistic child. But he said, do you realise how difficult it is for me to stay objective when you've got a son who was absolutely fine up until the moment he had the MMR vaccination, and since then has basically, and he actually used the word, he said he's now actually pretty much a vegetable. And he said, do you realise how difficult it is for a father to make that observation, and even more difficult for a journalist to stay objective?
Well, at the talk that I gave, and hopefully that's out now, and if people are interested and they want to listen to me sort of talking for an hour on this subject, I related some stories from patients. And I was on a Skype consult with a patient, and she had a translator. During the course of that consult, she started to cry, and I said, what's wrong? I said something's upset or whatever. And she said, no, she said, because she'd taken the son's been kicked out of school because the son is now autistic and they can't handle him in school. And she's beside herself. So she's gone down to these special schools that they have to go to. And she said before she even got in through the door, she heard animal noises. And she went in there and said there were kids there making animal noises. She burst into tears, said, how can I leave my child in this place? Because in essence, what happens, and I tried to explain, is because of the damage that's done, possibly, I don't believe it's all vaccines, but I believe that the insult that they can cause to certain systems in the body can send some kids over the edge, which brings autism. There's other reasons as well. And as she said, she was terribly upset. It's upsetting for me because I'm a human being and I'm tasked with trying to help this person. We're the ones that are in the front line trying to get these kids back as part of the work that we do. And I can tell you something, it's flipping hard. It's not easy. It requires, really cutting edge science to try and do this. And considering now, not just the example I gave you, but there's something called homeoprophylaxis, which I was hoping to try and hook you up with at least one of the leading experts in that. But unfortunately, the times, they're in the States, and the times are very difficult for patients. But well, hopefully, if you want, Ian, we can still try and arrange that. They've now done huge studies, millions of people in Cuba, in different parts of the world, in India, over the last God knows how many hundreds of years. And they're on par with or better than vaccine protection without these horrible, dangerous side effects or effects, as we say. So, and people don't know about this. I mean, obviously, I'm dealing with this stuff all day long, so I know about this. And you even talk to quote unquote alternative practitioners, and they don't even know about it. And you think, wow, what a great job that has been done at keeping this information away from the public. Because they did a huge study in Cuba, and they gave a homeoprophylaxis, which is just it's a type of homeopathy. It's not classically homeopathic, but it's a type of it. And they've got all the studies. It was issued through the medical system, and they actually defeated meningitis, leptospirosis, and all these weird and wonderful diseases and problems.
Well, just at a quick look, Dr. Isaac Golden seems to be one of the pioneers of that. And just looking at a quick article here, it says the efficacy. Bear in mind that I said earlier that the efficacy of the pharmaceutical industry that they seek is 5% to get a medicine approved. And in this particular article, it says the efficacy of homoprophylaxis was 95% after 6 months and 91% after 12 months. And this is based on a complete and statistically rigorous report. And this is the website. The website is, I can't put it on screen because it's small print, but it's HOMstudy, HOMstudy.net.
Yeah, there's practitioners here. I brought the leading person over to train doctors here to do the work. And oddly enough, very few homeopaths turned up because there's a kind of philosophical argument about whether it's classically homeopathic or not. But just to give you how sad this is, Hahnemann, who's the inventor of homeopathy, his first use of this as a principle for doing this was nearly 200 years ago. And we've had this nonsense. It's unreal. It's been there for nearly 2 centuries.
Yeah.
And we're still taking stuff that causes death, paralysis, and all sorts of other nonsense. And it doesn't have to happen. The problem is, and we all know the problem, if you move aside, I'm quite happy to discuss that, the kind of depopulation thing. I mean, I'm happy to go down any rabbit hole in regards to that. Whether I can agree with it or not agree with it, I can see the point and the logic of it. As I said before, whether it's by default or by design, you are removing and injuring God knows how many people on this planet totally unnecessarily.
Well, and we're getting in early because, I mean, we talked about, what have we got? 26 preschool vaccinations. But of course, it's the MMR that has come under most scrutiny. But over the last few years, of course, we've had the HPV. And here's an article from about a year ago. Gardasil, which is, of course, the HPV vaccine, one of the two HPV vaccines. Gardasil linked to deaths and disabilities after young girls vaccinated. Now, this was in Canada. But, the most famous case in this country was one I think I mentioned when we spoke last week about the young girl in Birmingham who went into coma 2 days after having the HPV vaccination. But, there is now an increasing amount of evidence showing that these HPV vaccines are having significant negative health impact on the girls that take them. And sadly, of course, this is literally... Oh, no, sorry, that article is from just a few months ago. I think the Gardasil one is from March or April of this year. This is from a year ago. And this is the BBC. The call to offer HPV vaccines to boys. So, I mean, basically, obviously, Big Pharma, having milked the revenue stream that's on offer by pushing this vaccine to all 13-year-old schoolgirls, has now decided that there's the way in which they can double that revenue stream is to offer it to boys. Now, I think I'm right in saying that of the two HPV vaccines, the two manufacturers, one of whom is GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, but now I think what they do is they share the revenues because they basically have a 2-year cycle where one provider provides the vaccines for 2 years and then it switches to the other vaccine. So if that isn't a cabal, if that isn't carving up the market to effectively share the revenues, I don't know what is.
Well, I mean, I was in I said before, this is the most stupidest vaccine of all of them. And there's huge science showing that it won't have any great effect on the morbidity or mortality due to the cancer it's supposed to be stopping. But put that aside for a second. Let's look at the independence of people that are supposed to be advising that these things have to be taken. I think it's the JIVC, Joint Independent Committee on Vaccination, something along those lines. Well, they're in control of really telling, let's say advising, let's just say telling the government. But the Joint Voluntary Independent, that's it, voluntary, well, that's a joke. Advising the government on who should be vaccinated and what. I was in a GP surgery and I had to go in to collect something for someone. I can't remember what it was. And as I went in there, I spoke to the secretary. I said, "Oh, hello, I've just come to pick this up." And then she turned around and something must have flashed up on the computer. "Do you haven't vaccinated your children?" And I said, "Well, that's neither here nor there, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Well, you've got to see the practice nurse." I said, "Trust me, the last person who needs to see a practice nurse is me." Anyway, long story short, she presses a button and flying comes out. Try and get the GP to come out of his room for anything else. GP comes out and he's now blocking me leaving the surgery. And so I've got him in front of me and behind me, I've got the waiting room full of patients. And he starts to have a go at me. I say, "Listen, I never want to have a fight with anyone." I said, "Look, please, I'll just come to pick this medicine up. Can I just go, please?" And long story short, he turns around and says, "Right, well, you've got to go up to see the vaccination committee." I mean, this is unreal. I mean, this is England, right? This is like something from pre-Glasnost Russia, for crying out loud. At that point then, the meter in my head hit red. And that was it. I just opened up and gave it to him. And I kid you not, he tried to argue. And then one of the things I said to him was about the independent committee. On that independent committee that decides what you have, pretty much nearly all of them work for the vaccine manufacturers that are selling this stuff.
Of course.
And when they published a document on this, lots of them actually hit. This is a public document in this country. They scribbled out the names, so you couldn't see who was on it. I mean, it's just outrageous, and that's just part of what they were doing. You know, as I started hitting with all this stuff, he said, I don't understand it," and he ran away and he locked himself in his room.
Graham, as is always the case, I mean, we've only scratched the surface tonight, and this definitely has to be continued. I will just draw attention. This is the presentation that you gave at AV6, DNA Codes Under Attack, the vaccination agenda. Up until now, the DVDs from AV6 have only been available in the box sets, but I spoke with my distributor, and because of the importance of this subject, the DVDs of your presentation and David Noakes' presentation are going to be available singly from later this week. So, Graham, thank you so much for joining us again. I mean, as is always the case, we encourage people not to take anything we say at face value. Do your own research, and it's amazing what you find. You only have to look. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. Please stay online for the UK column news, and then join me at 9 o'clock for this week's edition of Fracking Nightmare.